the storm in the hold. The dark wave that came quickly nearer and nearer to the Nan Shan looked as high as a mountain and had a thin white line up at the top of it. The ship was still for a while, and then she started to climb this mountain of water. Tons of water fell onto the deck. Every man on the ship grabbed what he could and held on. The Nan Shan climbed the enormous wave for what seemed like a very long time. Then she began to go down the other side. Again, tons of water fell heavily onto the ship, making her shake from top to bottom. In the engine room, Jukes and Rout looked at each other with horror on their faces.
If another wave like that hits us, it'll finish us,
said Rout.
What can be left on deck after such an enormous wave? If it destroyed the ventilators, there's no hope. Now it's all gone up there for sure. The wheelhouse, the bridge, the chart room, everything,
said Jukes. But there was no second wave, and a short while later they heard MacWhirr's voice in the speaking tube again.
That was a little uncomfortable, but we have to do our best, Jukes. When your men have picked up all the money, I want you to come back up to the bridge. I need you here.
Yes, sir,
replied Jukes, and, not feeling very happy about it, he went to get some. Opening the door for the second time, he saw the same chaos as before. But this time he was ready for it. Shouting at his men to help, he started to push the Chinese laborers into one corner of the room. The crew joined arms to make them all stay in the same place. One of the crew then brought some rope, and they used this to make lifelines. Now, the Chinese laborers could grab onto the lifelines and not fall from side to side. After they fastened the ropes well to the sides of the hold, Jukes and his men started to move all the broken pieces of wood and the money into a locked room just next to the hold. While Jukes and his men were doing this work, the Chinese laborers were terrified. What did these sailors want to do to them? Some thought that they were going to steal all their money. Others thought that Jukes and his men were there to kill them. They sat on the floor, their faces full of fear. But to Jukes, their fear looked like fury. Suddenly, one of the laborers started speaking to him loudly in Chinese. He pointed at the locked room where their money was, and then started shouting. At once, the rest of them started shouting at Jukes and the crew. The crew didn't understand them, but their Chinese words seemed angry, and they seemed to be threatening Jukes and the others. So Jukes and the rest of the crew left the hold as quickly as possible, closing the heavy metal door behind them loudly. They were all happy to be out of the hold. It was not only because of the Chinese laborers there. Sailors don't like the idea of drowning below the deck. At once, Jukes went up to the bridge to look for MacWhirr. He found him there, holding on to the railings.
We did it, sir. We picked up all the money, like you said. And we fastened some lifelines to the walls for the Chinese laborers to hold on to.
Well done. I knew that you could do it.
Answered MacWhirr.
Did you?
Said Jukes to himself.
The wind stopped.
Said MacWhirr. It was true. Although the waves were still enormous, there was no wind at all. Suddenly, Jukes noted that he could again hear all the usual noises of the ship. The deep noise of the engines, the crew calling out to each other, the noise of creaking wood.
It's not over yet. My book says that there's worse still to come.
Explained MacWhirr. The Nan Shan was now in the eye of the storm, the exact centre of it, where all was strangely quiet and calm. Soon, they would start sailing through the other part of the storm. But Jukes seemed not to hear what MacWhirr was saying. He went on,
It wasn't easy. We had to fight to do the job. They didn't understand that we were trying to help them. They seemed to think that we were trying to hurt them. I was worried when we put all their money in the locked room. They didn't like that at all. They started to shout at us. I think that they were threatening us. We had to get out of there as quickly as possible. You told me to pick up all the money, but it wasn't as easy as it seems.
Well, we had to do the right thing by those laborers, Jukes. Even if we have only 5 minutes more to live, we've done the right thing by them. And that's that.
Jukes was still excited about his adventure and had more to say.
But that isn't the end of it, sir. They're quiet now, but there's going to be more trouble. They know that this isn't a British ship anymore. I didn't like that Thai flag from the start, sir. And it's not going to be easy when we give them back their money.
No, this isn't the end of it.
Answered MacWhirr.
Can you stay on deck for a minute, Jukes?
Are you going below, sir?
Asked Jukes quickly. From his voice, it seemed he felt sure that the storm would start once he was alone on the bridge and in command of the ship. The captain went into the chart room. It was dark inside, but he knew the room well and felt his way. He lit one of the lamps and went over to look at the barometer. It was pointing down to very stormy, the worst MacWhirr had ever seen. So the book that he was reading and the barometer agreed. Getting out of the typhoon would be far worse than getting into it. He looked around the room that was usually so tidy, but was now in chaos, and thought,
Perhaps it's the last time I'll do this.
I got another man to take Hackett's place.
said Jukes to the captain, when MacWhirr came out on deck again.
It wasn't easy to get anyone to do it, but I didn't want to have to be helmsman myself. Hackett's resting now, not far from the wheel. He looks half dead. The second mate's there too. Is he hurt, sir?
No, he isn't right in the head.
But he's hit himself, sir. He's got a cut on the side of his face.
Yes, I had to knock him down. Listen, Dukes. The typhoon will come back very soon, and this time it'll be worse than before. It'll take this ship and pick her up and shake her and try to break her. It'll take what's still above deck. Of course, I know that there's not much now to take.
Only us two,
said Jukes.
Yes, and if the typhoon takes me, you'll be in command. The second mate will be no help to you,
answered MacWhirr. Jukes was suddenly quiet at this. MacWhirr went on.
If that happens, make sure that you go on sailing into the wind. Do you hear? Stay on course and stay calm. Hold that one idea in your head, and the ship will survive.
Just then, they could hear the noise of the wind again. It seemed like a great number of soldiers hurrying nearer very fast. The few minutes of calm were finished. MacWhirr thought for a minute about how well he knew the Nan Shan from years of sailing her. She was almost like a home for him.
I wouldn't like to lose her,
he said aloud to himself, while the waves began to hit the deck again. Chapter 8. 3 Letters. The Nan Shan arrived in Fuchao on a bright sunny day. She looked a real sight, and soon everyone in the harbour was talking about her.
That ship looks like she's just come back from a war,
said one.
It looks to me like the crew found her at the bottom of the sea and pulled her up to sell her for the metal,
said another.
I'll buy her for £5,
said a third. Less than an hour after MacWhirr's ship arrived, a small boat took a thin man with an angry red face off the ship and left him on shore. While the boat moved away, the thin man turned and shook his hand angrily at the Nan Shan. A tall, fat sailor with watery eyes came over to speak to the man, who was no longer the Nan Shan's second mate.
Hello, old friend?
Hello there. What are you doing here?
Said the thin man, quickly shaking hands.
I heard that perhaps there's a job going,
said the fat man. The one-time second mate shook his hand angrily at the Nan Shan again.
I wouldn't let the captain of that ship be in command of the poorest riverboats,
he cried angrily.
Really?
Said his fat friend.
Of course. I'd like to make trouble for him, but he's sailing under a Thai flag. What can I do? You know, he told his chief engineer that I wasn't right in the head. Me! He's the stupidest man that ever sailed the seas. You can't really be thinking of...
Did you get your money?
Asked his fat friend suddenly.
Oh, yes. He paid me before I left. Have your breakfast on shore, he told me.
Did he? Shall we go and have a drink then?
And he hit me.
He didn't. You must tell me all about it. But not here. I know a quiet place where we can have a bottle or two of something nice and cold.
And so the two of them walked away together into town. Jukes watched them go, and then went back to planning the repairs that the poor old Nan Shan needed. She was no longer the beautiful ship that sailed out of Dumbarton just 3 years before. She looked old and tired, like an enormous animal that has won a great fight against a terrible enemy, a fight which has broken it inside. While Jukes was speaking to the crew, telling them what to do, Captain MacWhirr stood on the bridge, looking at the harbour and at the town behind it. He was thinking about what he would need to buy in Foochow. His pens and pencils all went overboard during the typhoon, and he would need to get new ones. And he needed a new rain hat too. He was happy to survive the typhoon, but he did not think about that much now. Perhaps the only thing that the typhoon really did was to take this quiet man, shake him up a little, and make him speak a few more words than usual. Back in England, not long after that, 3 people were reading 3 letters. The first, Mrs. MacWhirr, was reading her letter in the same way that she read all her husband's letters. She read a few words here and there to get an idea of more or less what it was about.
They are called typhoons. Jukes didn't seem to like it. Some things that you can't find in books.
Why were his letters always so long and full of details?
A calm that lasted for more than 20 minutes. See you and the children again.
Now, why did he say that? He was always thinking of coming home. What need was there for that, when he had such a good job? Worriedly, she quickly went on a few pages.
Only 3 with broken legs. The fairest way. Tried to do the right thing.
No, there was no more about coming home. Reading so quickly, she didn't see the part that said,
For a while, I thought that I would never see you and the children again.
The door opened and Lydia, her daughter, ran into the room. Seeing the letter in her mother's hand, she stopped in surprise and waited to hear the latest news.
Your father's well,
said Mrs. MacWhirr. Lydia did not look very interested.
Go and get your hat,
said her mother.
We're going out. There's a sale at Linham's, that shop which you like so much.
How wonderful!
Shouted Lydia and she ran to get her hat. Outside Lynham's, Mrs. MacWhirr saw one of her friends. They talked about shops, clothes, and their husbands.
No, he's not coming home yet. It's terrible that he has to be away from us for so long, but it's good to know that he's well. He likes the weather in the China Sea.
From the way that she talked, it seemed that poor Captain MacWhirr only sailed to China because of his health. Mrs. Rout was reading out her husband's letter to Rout's mother.
The captain of the ship did something very clever. It's difficult to explain how clever it really was. Do you remember Captain MacWhirr? Solomon said that he wasn't the quickest thinker.
Young Mrs. Rout turned the pages to find out what this clever thing was. But she could find nothing.
Oh no, I don't understand.
What don't you understand, dear?
Asked old Mrs. Rout. She liked her son's letters, although she couldn't remember very well what he looked like. It was a very long time since she last saw him.
Well, there's nothing more about this clever thing that the captain did. Why doesn't he tell us more about it?
I don't know, my dear,
said old Mrs. Rout. But the last part of the letter, the younger Mrs. Rout read silently to herself.
I know that we can't do anything at the moment
because of my mother. But I want you to come out here. I'd like to buy you a small house where we could see each other. We spend so little time together, and we're not getting any younger.
Young Mrs. Rout was quiet for a while, and she looked unhappy. Then she shook herself and said to old Mrs. Rout,
He's well, the same as always. Come on, let's have a cup of tea.
Jukes's letter to his friend gave all the details of the clever thing that Captain MacWhirr did. First, he wrote all about the typhoon, and then about how he and the crew made lifelines for the Chinese labourers in the hold.
Their money. They thought that we were trying to steal it. Only very desperate robbers could think of stealing money in the middle of a typhoon. Some of them even started shouting at us. When I spoke to the captain, I said that we should be careful when we were giving the money back. I said that all the crew should be there and that we should have some guns with us. That way, there would be no problems. He didn't seem to like my idea. Well, we had a lot of repairs to do after the typhoon, and I made the men start working on them. I was very tired, after nearly 30 hours without sleep, so I went to lie down on my bed for a while. Some time later, one of the crew woke me. He told me that the Chinese labourers were all on deck, and that MacWhirr was giving them their money. I couldn't believe it. I called some of the crew. We got the guns, and we ran there as quickly as possible. When MacWhirr saw me, he was really angry, and he told me to put the guns away. It seems that, while I was sleeping, he decided, because all the labourers were 7-year ones, that the fairest thing was to give each labourer exactly the same amount of money. One of the Chinese labourers helped to explain this to the others. And so, MacWhirr gave each man his money, while all the others waited their turn. Then, he gave the injured labourers their money. In the end, there was a little extra money, and he gave this to the ones who were the most injured. For a man who's always so slow and sure, I must say that he did very well.